You think Black Christmas desserts in the 1960s were just sweet potato pie and pecan pie? Think again. African American mothers across the South created some of the most inventive and deeply meaningful holiday sweets in American culinary history. Let's dig into 30 cheap Christmas desserts no one makes anymore. Sock It to Me cake became the crown jewel of 1960s Black Christmas tables, a dense butter cake swirled with brown sugar and cinnamon that made children abandon all other desserts. The cake got its sassy name from the popular television catchphrase, but its roots ran deeper, representing the ingenuity of mothers who transformed simple pantry staples into something that tasted like celebration. The batter was mixed by hand in ceramic bowls, poured into tube pans that had seen decades of holiday service, and baked until the kitchen filled with warmth. A ribbon of cinnamon pecan filling ran through the center, creating surprise in every slice. The glaze on top, powdered sugar thinned with milk, dripped down the sides like fresh snow. At only pennies per serving, this cake fed entire extended families during Christmas gatherings when money was tight but love was abundant. Mothers guarded their recipes fiercely, passing them to daughters who earned the right through years of kitchen apprenticeship. Japanese fruitcake held a mystifying name that had nothing to do with Japan and everything to do with Southern Black Christmas tradition. This layered spice cake, alternated with coconut filling, became the centerpiece that grandmothers started preparing weeks before the holiday arrived. The layers were dense with raisins, nuts, and warm spices, cinnamon, allspice, and cloves that perfumed kitchens for days. Between each layer went a cooked filling of fresh coconut, sugar, and citrus that set into something almost candy-like. Families debated whether the name came from the exotic coconut or simply from wanting the cake to sound fancy. What mattered more was the ritual: children grating coconuts by hand, mothers stirring filling on the stove, grandmothers supervising every step. The cake improved as it aged, wrapped in cloth and stored in cool pantries where flavors melded into something transcendent. By Christmas morning, each slice revealed beautiful layers that tasted like heritage itself. Red velvet cake in the 1960s bore little resemblance to the bright crimson versions sold today. It was subtler, more sophisticated, and made with buttermilk that gave it genuine tang. African American mothers achieved the distinctive color through a chemical reaction between cocoa, buttermilk, and vinegar, creating a mahogany hue that deepened as it baked. The cream cheese frosting hadn't yet become standard. Instead, mothers made cooked flour frosting, called ermine frosting, that was silky, not too sweet, and required patience to perfect. Beating the mixture until peaks formed took arm strength that modern stand mixers cannot replicate. The cake appeared at Christmas dinners in gleaming cake stands, its color suggesting festivity without artificial dyes. Children knew that red velvet meant celebration, that its appearance on the table signaled a special occasion worth remembering. The recipe traveled through church cookbooks and handwritten cards, each family adding small variations that made their version unique and deeply personal. Lane cake carried Alabama heritage into 1960s Black Christmas celebrations, a white layer cake filled with bourbon-soaked raisins, pecans, and coconut that made adults smile knowingly while children enjoyed the sweetness. The filling was cooked slowly, eggs and sugar combined with butter until thick, then studded with dry fruits and nuts plumped in whiskey overnight. Some mothers used homemade fruit wine when bourbon was unavailable, achieving similar depth with whatever spirits the household kept. The cake layers themselves were tender and pale, made with egg whites only, providing neutral canvas for the rich filling. Lane cake was considered fancy enough for company, but affordable enough for families who save throughout the year for Christmas splurges. The bourbon flavor mellowed as the cake aged, making it better on Christmas Day than when first assembled. Mothers who made exceptional lane cake earned reputations that followed them through decades of church gatherings and family reunions. Divinity candy represented the precarious magic of Christmas candy making, a fluffy white confection that could fail spectacularly if humidity crept too high or temperatures dropped wrong. African American mothers learned to read the weather before attempting Divinity, choosing crisp, clear days when sugar syrup would behave properly. The process required pouring hot sugar syrup in thin streams into beaten egg whites, transforming the mixture into clouds of sweetness that held shape when dropped onto waxed paper. Pecans or walnuts studded each piece, adding crunch to the ethereal candy. Children watched the transformation with wonder, seeing how patience and skill could create something that looked like edible snow. Divinity was packed into tins and given as gifts, proof of a mother's dedication and expertise. The candy didn't keep long, which made it special, a Christmas-only treat that couldn't be replicated during humid summer months. Failed batches were never wasted, but spread on toast, teaching that even mistakes could nourish. Pralines connected 1960s Black Christmas tables to deep Louisiana roots, those creamy pecan candies that shattered into sweetness with every bite. African American mothers in New Orleans and throughout the Gulf Coast made pralines using recipes passed through generations from Creole grandmothers who had adapted French traditions with brown sugar and native pecans. The candy required precise temperature control, cooking the sugar mixture to exactly the right stage before beating until it turned from glossy to matte. Pour too early and the pralines stayed sticky forever. Wait too long and they turned grainy and hard. Children learned to recognize the ready moment by the way mixture sheeted off the spoon, knowledge transferred through watching rather than reading. Pralines were packed into decorative boxes for Christmas gifts, each piece representing skill that store-bought candy could never match. The creamy texture against toasted pecans created flavor combinations that defined Gulf Coast Christmas celebrations. Coconut snowball cookies appeared on Black Christmas cookie platters like edible decorations, round butter cookies rolled in snowy white coconut that left sweet traces on children's fingers. The dough came together quickly: butter, sugar, flour, and vanilla, but the rolling technique required practice to achieve perfectly round balls that wouldn't flatten during baking. Fresh from the oven, while still warm, the cookies were rolled in sweetened coconut that clung to their surfaces like fresh fallen snow. Some mothers added finely chopped pecans to the dough for texture, while others kept the recipe pure and simple. The cookies traveled well, packed into tins that went to church gatherings, neighbor visits, and family reunions throughout the holiday season. Children counted how many snowballs remained in the cookie jar, negotiating with siblings for a fair share. The simplicity meant even young daughters could help, learning kitchen skills while creating memories that would outlast any single Christmas. Peanut butter fudge became the democratic Christmas candy of 1960s Black households, affordable enough for every family, delicious enough for every palate, and simple enough for beginning cooks to master. The recipe required only sugar, milk, butter, and peanut butter, ingredients that most pantries contained even during tight financial times. Mothers cooked the mixture on the stovetop, stirring constantly to prevent scorching, then beat it vigorously until it thickened and lost its shine. Poured into buttered pans and scored while still warm, the fudge set into squares that were creamy yet firm enough to hold their shape. The peanut butter flavor dominated, rich, salty, and satisfying in ways that chocolate fudge couldn't match. Children helped with stirring and learned that candy making required patience and attention rather than expensive ingredients. Plates of peanut butter fudge appeared at every Christmas gathering, disappearing quickly as guests returned for seconds and thirds. Vinegar pie transformed during Christmas into something special when African American mothers added warm spices and served it alongside grander holiday desserts. This Depression-era creation used pantry staples, vinegar, sugar, eggs, and butter to create custard-like filling when lemons were too expensive or unavailable in rural southern stores. The vinegar provided tartness that mimicked citrus, while nutmeg and vanilla added warmth appropriate for winter celebrations. Mothers who remembered harder times kept making vinegar pie even when circumstances improved, honoring recipes that had sustained families through scarcity. The pie was never the star of Christmas dessert tables, but occupied an important supporting role, offering something familiar amid fancier offerings. Children who grew up eating vinegar pie often didn't realize until adulthood that it was born from necessity rather than choice. The recipe represented resilience baked into every slice, a reminder that creativity could transform limitation into tradition. Molasses stack cake appeared at 1960s Black Christmas gatherings as towering testament to community cooperation, each thin layer contributed by different family members or neighbors who brought their portion to assemble. The layers were more like dense cookies, made with molasses, flour, and spices that created sturdy foundations for the apple filling spread between. Dried apples were stewed with molasses and cinnamon until they became thick paste that held layers together and softened them over days of aging. The assembled cake stood 6 to 12 layers high, wrapped in cloth, and stored where the flavors melded into something greater than individual parts. Making stack cake was a community event. Women gathered in kitchens, each contributing her signature layer while catching up on holiday news. Children watched and learned that some traditions require cooperation rather than individual achievement. By Christmas morning, the cake had transformed into a cohesive whole that tasted like concentrated holiday spirit. Caramel cake stood as the ultimate test of a Black mother's kitchen expertise, its golden frosting requiring the kind of patience and precision that separated good cooks from legendary ones. The cake layers were simple butter cake, tender and moist, but the icing demanded complete attention. Sugar, butter, and milk cooked together until the mixture reached exactly the right temperature, then beaten until it transformed from liquid to spreadable gold. Pour too soon and the icing ran off the sides. Wait too long and it hardened into chunks that refused to smooth. Mothers stood over hot stoves, stirring constantly, knowing that a moment's distraction could ruin hours of work. The finished cake gleamed under Christmas lights, its caramel flavor deep and slightly smoky from the cooked sugar. Children watched the icing process with fascination, learning that some things couldn't be rushed. Caramel cake appeared only at Christmas and special occasions, making its presence on the table a declaration that this day mattered. Tea cakes represented the softest, most beloved cookies in 1960s Black Christmas traditions. Not too sweet, not too fancy, just perfectly tender rounds that melted on the tongue. African American grandmothers mixed these by hand, creaming butter and sugar until light, adding eggs and vanilla, then folding in flour until the dough came together soft but not sticky. The cookies were rolled thick and cut with drinking glasses or hand-me-down cutters that had seen generations of Christmas baking. Baked just until the edges barely turned golden, they emerged soft enough to bend slightly before breaking. Tea cakes weren't showpieces like layer cakes. They were everyday love made edible, the cookies that appeared in cookie jars throughout December and disappeared just as quickly. Children ate them with cold milk after school, with hot cocoa on Christmas morning, with nothing at all except hunger and gratitude. The recipe required no exotic ingredients, just pantry staples transformed by skill into something that tasted like home. Buttermilk pie offered tangy sweetness that cut through the richness of Christmas dinner, its custard filling smooth and slightly acidic in ways that refreshed rather than overwhelmed. African American mothers made it from pantry staples: eggs, sugar, butter, flour, and the buttermilk that most households kept for biscuits. The filling came together quickly, whisked until smooth, then poured into homemade pie crust and baked until the top turned golden. The pie was never the star of the dessert table, but occupied an important supporting role, offering balance amid sweeter offerings. Some mothers added nutmeg for brightness, while others kept the recipe pure. Buttermilk pie traveled well to church gatherings, its sturdy custard holding shape through hours of sitting. Children who grew up eating it remembered the tang as much as the sweetness, that distinctive flavor no other pie could match. The recipe cost almost nothing, but delivered satisfaction that expensive desserts failed to provide. Coconut custard pie brought tropical richness to 1960s Black Christmas tables, its filling studded with sweetened coconut that toasted golden on top during baking. The custard base was simple: eggs, sugar, milk, vanilla, but the coconut transformed it into something exotic. Mothers used bagged sweetened coconut from grocery stores or fresh coconuts cracked and grated by hand for deeper flavor. The pie was poured into unbaked crust and baked slowly, allowing the custard to set while the coconut on top turned crispy and caramelized. Each slice revealed layers of texture: flaky crust, creamy custard, chewy coconut throughout, crispy coconut on top. The pie appeared at church potlucks, where it always disappeared quickly, at family dinners where children fought over corner pieces. Coconut custard pie represented accessible luxury, making Christmas feel special without requiring expensive ingredients. The recipe traveled through handwritten cards and church cookbooks, each family adding variations that made their version distinct. Blackberry jam cake emerged from summer's preserved bounty, using jars of homemade jam that mothers had put up months earlier when berries hung heavy on roadside bushes. The cake itself was dense and spiced with cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg, its crumb moistened by blackberry jam stirred directly into the batter. The deep purple-brown color made it look almost like chocolate cake, surprising guests who expected one flavor and discovered another entirely. Blackberry jam cake was especially common in rural communities where families still gathered wild berries each summer, preserving them in mason jars that lined pantry shelves like jewels. The cake required no fancy frosting. A simple glaze or dusting of powdered sugar let the jam flavor shine through. Each slice connected Christmas to summer, to family berry picking expeditions, to the labor of preservation that made winter abundance possible. The cake represented the cycle of seasons and the wisdom of saving summer's sweetness for December's cold. 7UP pound cake became the modern marvel of 1960s Black Christmas baking, using the popular lemon-lime soda to create impossibly moist cake with subtle citrus brightness. The carbonation made the cake rise higher and stay tender longer than traditional recipes, while the lemon-lime flavor added complexity without requiring fresh citrus. Mothers discovered the recipe through friends, church cookbooks, or the back of 7UP bottles, then adapted it to their tastes. The cake was baked in tube pans or bundt pans, its golden crust hiding the incredibly moist interior that stayed fresh for days. Some mothers glazed it with powdered sugar and lemon juice, while others served it plain, confident the cake needed no enhancement. 7UP. Pound cake traveled to every Christmas gathering, sliced thick and arranged on platters that emptied before other desserts were touched. The recipe proved that innovation and tradition could coexist, creating something new that honored the pound cake legacy Black families carried through generations. Sweet potato pudding offered a different experience than the familiar pie, its texture denser and its spice bolder, baked in casserole dishes rather than pie plates. African American mothers grated or mashed sweet potatoes, mixed them with eggs, sugar, butter, and warm spices, then baked the mixture until it set firm enough to slice but soft enough to melt on the tongue. Unlike pie with its separate crust, pudding was all filling, rich, intensely flavored, and deeply satisfying. Some versions included coconut or raisins, while others let the sweet potato flavor dominate without distraction. The pudding was often served warm with cold whipped cream or simply eaten plain, each bite concentrated with the earthy sweetness of the potatoes themselves. Sweet potato pudding connected Christmas tables to the land, to gardens where families grew their own potatoes, to root cellars where they stored the harvest. The dish cost almost nothing but delivered nutrition and comfort that sustained families through the holiday season. Pecan pie in 1960s. Black households bore the marks of hand-cracked nuts and homemade crust, a far cry from the commercial versions that would later dominate grocery store shelves. Mothers bought pecans in bulk from farmers markets or gathered them from backyard trees, spending evenings cracking shells and picking out perfect halves. The filling was pure alchemy: corn syrup, sugar, eggs, and butter cooked just enough to thicken, then poured over nuts arranged in careful patterns on unbaked crust. The pie baked slowly until the filling set and the top turned glossy and slightly crystallized. Each slice revealed the mother's artistry in how she'd arranged the pecans, some creating concentric circles, others random scatter, that still somehow looked intentional. Pecan pie was expensive by Depression-era standards, but remained affordable enough for Christmas splurges. The nuts themselves carried meaning. Many families had pecan trees planted by grandparents, making each pie a connection to ancestors who had planted for future harvests. Banana pudding with meringue transcended simple dessert to become the most requested dish at 1960s Black Christmas gatherings. Its layers of vanilla wafers, sliced bananas, and homemade custard crowned with golden peaked meringue. Mothers made the custard from scratch, cooking milk, eggs, sugar, and vanilla over gentle heat until the mixture thickened enough to coat a spoon. The assembly was its own ritual: wafers lining the dish, bananas layered between, custard poured over to soften everything together. The meringue required beating egg whites until stiff peaks formed, spreading them over the warm pudding, then baking just long enough to brown the peaks. Children watched through oven windows as the meringue transformed from glossy white to golden brown, knowing that soon they'd be fighting over the corner pieces. Banana pudding appeared at every family gathering, church social, and Christmas dinner, its presence as essential as the tree itself. Pineapple. Upside down cake arrived in 1960s, Black Christmas tables gleaming like edible sunshine, its caramelized pineapple rings and bright red cherries creating patterns that made children gasp with delight. The cake was baked in cast iron skillets, butter and brown sugar melted in the bottom before pineapple rings were arranged in careful circles with maraschino cherries filling each center. Yellow cake batter covered the fruit, then the skillet went into the oven until the cake set and the sugars underneath bubbled into caramel. The dramatic reveal came after baking, flipping the hot skillet onto a serving plate, lifting it to expose the glistening fruit in its amber pool of sweetness. Mothers learned to execute this flip quickly and confidently, knowing hesitation could ruin the presentation. The cake was best served warm, each slice showing off perfect pineapple rings against golden cake. The recipe used canned pineapple, making it affordable year-round, but especially meaningful at Christmas when tropical fruit felt exotic. Oatmeal cookies with raisins and spices became the workhouse treat of 1960s Black Christmas baking, sturdy enough to ship to relatives and delicious enough to disappear from cookie jars within hours. African American mothers added extra cinnamon and nutmeg during the holidays, transforming everyday cookies into something festive. The oats gave these cookies their distinctive, chewy texture, while raisins plumped during baking added bursts of sweetness. Some mothers added chopped pecans, while others kept the recipe simple and affordable. The cookies were mixed by hand in large batches, dropped by spoonfuls onto greased baking sheets, and baked until edges turned golden, while centers stayed soft. Children helped with the dropping process, learning that uniform size meant even baking. Oatmeal cookies traveled well in Christmas packages sent to family members who had moved north for factory jobs. The recipe cost almost nothing but delivered satisfaction that fancy store-bought cookies couldn't match. Pound cake in its purest form, a pound each of butter, sugar, eggs, and flour, stood as the foundation of 1960s Black Christmas baking, the cake against which all others were measured. African American mothers creamed butter and sugar by hand until their arms ached, knowing that the effort created the tender crumb that distinguished homemade from store-bought. The eggs were added one at a time, each fully incorporated before the next, building the structure that would hold the cake together. Vanilla or lemon extract provided flavor, though some mothers added both for complexity. The cake was baked slowly in tube pans, the kitchen filling with richness that announced celebration to anyone who walked through the door. Pound cake required no frosting. Its golden crust and buttery interior needed no enhancement. Sliced thick and served plain with ice cream or with fresh fruit, it appeared at every Christmas gathering as proof that sometimes simplicity achieved what complexity could not. Chess pie carried mystery in its name and comfort in every bite, its simple filling of eggs, sugar, butter, and cornmeal, creating custard-like sweetness that satisfied without overwhelming. African American mothers made chess pie when resources were limited, knowing that pantry staples could produce something genuinely delicious. The filling came together quickly, eggs beaten with sugar, melted butter stirred in, cornmeal and vanilla added last, then poured into unbaked crust and baked until the top formed a thin, crackly shell. Nobody knew for certain where the name came from, though theories ranged from pie chess to the southern pronunciation of just pie. What mattered was the taste, rich, sweet, slightly grainy from the cornmeal, with a texture that fell somewhere between custard and candy. Chess pie appeared at church gatherings, where its simplicity was celebrated rather than scorned, at family dinners where grandmothers served it with quiet pride. The recipe proved that elegance had nothing to do with expense. Bread pudding transformed stale bread into Christmas luxury, its custardy richness studded with raisins and warm spices that made the kitchen smell like celebration itself. African American mothers saved bread heels and dry slices throughout the week, knowing that nothing should be wasted when it could become dessert. The bread was torn into pieces and soaked in a mixture of eggs, milk, sugar, and vanilla until it softened completely, then baked until the top turned golden and the center set into creamy richness. Raisins were essential, plumped in warm water or sometimes whiskey before being folded into the mixture. Some mothers made bourbon sauce to pour over warm slices, while others drizzled simple vanilla sauce or served the pudding plain. Bread pudding represented the philosophy that sustained Black families through generations. Waste nothing, transform everything, find abundance in what others might discard. Each bite tasted like resourcefulness made delicious. Ambrosia appeared at 1960s Black Christmas tables in cut glass bowls, its layers of orange segments, coconut, and sometimes marshmallows, creating something between salad and dessert. African American mothers assembled ambrosia the night before Christmas dinner, allowing flavors to meld and coconut to soften in the citrus juices. The oranges were sectioned by hand, a tedious process requiring patience and skill to remove membrane while keeping segments intact. Sweetened coconut was layered between fruit, sometimes with maraschino cherries for color or miniature marshmallows for sweetness. Some families added pineapple or bananas, creating variations that became signature dishes. Ambrosia was light enough to serve as palate cleanser between heavy courses, sweet enough to satisfy dessert cravings, and beautiful enough to earn its place on holiday tables. Children especially loved it. The combination of chewy coconut and juicy citrus felt like candy disguised as fruit. Rum balls required no baking yet, delivered sophisticated flavor that made adults smile knowingly while children wondered about the boozy taste. African American mothers crushed vanilla wafers into fine crumbs, mixed them with cocoa powder, powdered sugar, corn syrup, and rum, then rolled the mixture into balls coated in powdered sugar or chopped nuts. The process was simple enough that older children could help with crushing and rolling, though the rum remained in adult hands. The balls improved over several days as flavors melded, making them perfect for advanced Christmas preparation. They were packed into decorative tins and given as gifts to neighbors and family, proof that homemade treats could rival anything from expensive candy shops. Rum balls appeared at adult gatherings where their subtle kick was appreciated, at family dinners where they occupied the border between candy and cookie. Dark fruitcake carried generations of tradition in its dense, spirit-soaked slices, the Christmas dessert that divided families into passionate lovers and determined avoiders. African American mothers began preparation weeks before Christmas, soaking dried fruits in bourbon until they plumped and absorbed every drop of the spirits. The cake was dense with pecans, candied orange peel, and warm spices, baked slowly, then wrapped in cheesecloth soaked in spirits for aging. The cake rested in cool places, periodically brushed with bourbon, developing complexity that fresh cakes never achieved. Critics dismissed fruitcake, but those who grew up with properly made versions knew the dense slices carried flavors that improved each passing week. Dark fruitcake connected Christmas present to Christmas past, each slice containing history and patience. Gingerbread in 1960s. Black households meant moist, spicy cake rather than crisp cookies. Its molasses dark crumb carrying warmth that matched the season perfectly. African American mothers mixed batter by hand in large bowls, combining flour with ginger, cinnamon, cloves, and sometimes black pepper for extra heat that surprised and delighted the palate. Molasses provided both sweetness and deep color, while buttermilk added tang that balanced the bold spices beautifully. The cake was baked in square pans or cast iron skillets, emerging dark and wonderfully fragrant with edges that crisp slightly. Some mothers served gingerbread warm with lemon sauce, while others added whipped cream or dusted it with powdered sugar. The cake was affordable, molasses cost less than refined sugar, and filled kitchens with the unmistakable smell of celebration. Rice pudding offered creamy comfort that stretched leftover rice into something children begged for, its cinnamon-dusted top hiding custard richness beneath. African American mothers combined cooked rice with milk, eggs, sugar, and vanilla, then baked the mixture slowly until it set into silky smoothness. Raisins were folded in before baking, plumping as they absorbed the sweet custard around them. The pudding could be served warm from the oven or chilled overnight, each version offering different pleasures. Warm pudding soothed, while cold pudding refreshed. Some mothers added nutmeg alongside cinnamon, while others kept spicing simple. Rice pudding represented the economical wisdom of Black kitchens, transforming humble leftovers into dessert rivaling fancier offerings. Children who grew up eating it remembered the creamy texture and gentle sweetness long after forgetting elaborate holiday treats. Jelly. Roll cake demonstrated the skill of mothers who could bake thin sponge cake, spread it with homemade jelly, and roll it into spirals that looked professionally made. The cake required precision, too thick and it cracked when rolled, too thin and it tore under the filling's weight. African American mothers turned warm cake onto sugar-dusted towels, rolling immediately to set the shape, then unrolling to add filling before the final roll. The jelly was often homemade, grape, blackberry, or strawberry, preserved from summer's berry abundance for winter celebrations. Sliced crosswise, each piece revealed beautiful spirals of golden cake and jewel-toned filling that made children's eyes widen with delight. Jelly roll cakes were saved for Christmas Day, reserved for when family gathered. The recipe proved elegance emerged from simple ingredients combined with skill and love.
Cowpea soup simmered like a prayer whispered over a fire. The pot would start with water, a scoop of dried field peas, and maybe a scrap of salted meat if the week had been kind. Onions and garlic joined in, releasing their scent as the broth thickened into something golden and strong. The cowpeas, small and sturdy, softened slowly, their flavor deepening with every hour. This wasn't fast food. It was patient food, built on rhythm and time. Families made it during harvest, when work was hard and hands needed warmth. It was ladled into tin bowls and passed around without ceremony, each bite grounding you in gratitude. Sometimes cornbread floated on top like an offering, soaking up the last drops of broth. The soup tasted of earth and labor, of simple things done well. Cowpea soup was both meal and memory, tying together generations who had learned how to make plenty out of little. It was food for body and spirit alike, humble but whole, strong but soothing. Even now, its scent carries the same promise, that comfort comes from what you give, not what you have. Spinach dip, served with crackers and vegetables, was creamy, savory goodness that children scooped up enthusiastically. The rich cream cheese and sour cream base mixed with chopped spinach and seasonings, creating dips that tasted indulgent. Aunties would thaw frozen chopped spinach and squeeze out all the excess water before mixing it with softened cream cheese, sour cream, mayonnaise, dried vegetable soup mix, and sometimes water chestnuts for added crunch. The mixture was stirred together until smooth and well combined, then refrigerated for several hours to allow flavors to meld and develop depth. Some families served the dip cold, while others baked it briefly to create warm, bubbling cheese pulls that made every scoop exciting. In 1970s, Black households, spinach dip represented modern entertaining, recipes that came from package instructions but became beloved traditions. Children loved spinach dip because the vegetables were hidden in creamy richness, making them willing to eat greens. Sweet rice pudding with raisins was the dessert that turned a handful of leftover rice into something that felt like a gift at the Christmas table. Mothers heated the rice slowly with milk, sugar, butter, and warm spices until it thickened into a creamy, fragrant pot that sent comfort drifting through the kitchen. Raisins, often saved for holidays, were stirred in last, plumping into soft little bursts of sweetness. Children loved watching them swell and surface, treating each spoonful like a treasure hunt. The pudding tasted warm, gentle, and deeply soothing, the kind of dessert you ate slowly just to make the moment last. For families with little money, this dish proved that creativity mattered more than ingredients. Mothers knew it filled hungry stomachs and warmed cold winter mornings, stretching what they had into something memorable. It was served in bowls passed around the table, steaming and sweet, with cinnamon dusted lightly over the top when the budget. Pigs in blankets made with cocktail franks wrapped in crescent roll dough emerged from ovens as perfect little packages that children ate by the handful, their small size making them perfect for young appetites and hands that grabbed multiple pieces at once. Mothers would unroll refrigerated crescent dough, separating it along the perforations before cutting each triangle in half to create smaller pieces that wrapped around cocktail-sized hot dogs snugly. The wrapped franks were arranged on baking sheets with the dough seam facing down, sometimes brushed with melted butter or beaten egg for extra golden color. As they baked, the dough puffed up and turned flaky and golden, while the franks inside steamed and stayed juicy, creating combinations of textures that made every bite satisfying. In the 1970s, Black households, pigs in blankets represented quick, crowd-pleasing appetizers. Children loved them because they were perfectly sized for little hands. Candied yams were the sweetest thing to ever come out of a humble kitchen. Peeled, sliced, and baked with butter, sugar, and just a hint of cinnamon, they turned into a caramel-colored dream. On Sundays or holidays, you could bet the smell alone had kids running to the table. Black mothers knew how to make them shine, rich enough to feel like dessert, but served proudly beside collard greens or fried chicken. They didn't need marshmallows or fancy toppings, just patience and love. The syrup would bubble, the edges would crisp, and by the time the pan came out, it looked like gold. Even families who had little found a way to make this dish, because sweetness was a necessity, not a luxury. Candied yams reminded everyone that joy could still be baked right alongside struggle. Baked chicken and dressing casserole was the one-pan miracle that fed big families without stretching the budget too far, especially on holidays when everyone showed up hungry. Mothers layered shredded chicken with cornbread dressing broth, onions, celery, and spices, baking it until everything fused into a savory, comforting dish that smelled like home. The top browned just enough while the inside stayed moist, tender, and full of holiday flavor that felt like generations blending together. Children lined up with plates ready, knowing this was the kind of dish that disappeared fast because every scoop felt like a full meal. It was the ultimate sharing dish, one that made room for everyone at the table. Baked chicken and dressing tasted like togetherness tradition, and a Christmas table full of love that did not depend on extravagance. Rumaki wrapped chicken livers and water chestnuts in bacon created sophisticated bites that curious children tried, the crispy bacon exterior making them willing to taste the unfamiliar liver that turned out mild. Aunties would cut chicken livers into bite-sized pieces, marinate them briefly in soy sauce and ginger, then wrap them with water chestnut slices in bacon before securing everything with toothpicks. The bundles were arranged on baking sheets and roasted until the bacon crisped and rendered, the fat keeping the liver moist while adding smoky saltiness that transformed the organ meat into something special. As they cooked, the soy sauce caramelized slightly, creating a sweet, savory glaze that coated the bacon. In Black households during the 1970s, Rumaki represented culinary adventurousness, recipes borrowed from magazines that brought international flavors to holiday tables. Children who were brave enough to try them discovered that bacon really did make everything better. Chitlins' holiday feast once marked winter celebrations with an aroma as unforgettable as the labor required to prepare it. Hog intestines were cleaned thoroughly, then simmered for hours with onions, vinegar, and spices until tender. The dish demanded patience and community, often bringing families together for a full day of washing and cooking. Served with hot sauce and cornbread, chitlins carried the history of using every part of the animal, a practice born of necessity during slavery and carried forward as a mark of resilience. Despite the strong scent that filled kitchens and neighborhoods, the feast represented abundance and pride, especially during Christmas and New Year gatherings. Elders spoke of the old days while younger generations learned the careful methods required to make the dish safe and flavorful. In many places, health concerns and changing tastes have pushed chitlins aside, but the tradition still holds a powerful place in memory as a symbol of perseverance and celebration. Buttermilk pound cake was the Christmas dessert that greeted guests before they even stepped fully inside the house, because its warm, sweet smell drifted through every room. Mothers mixed flour, sugar, eggs, butter, and buttermilk with practiced rhythm, creating a batter so thick it barely moved when stirred. The cake baked slowly in a heavy pan, rising into a dense, tender loaf with a golden crust that cracked just slightly along the top. Children hovered near the oven, asking if it was ready yet, even though they knew pound cake took patience. When it finally cooled enough to slice, mothers cut each piece thin so everyone could have a share. The flavor was rich and comforting, sweet without being overwhelming, with the tang of buttermilk giving it a depth that lingered on the tongue. Pound cake was never just dessert, it was a gesture of welcome, love, and holiday generosity. It appeared at Christmas dinners, church gatherings, and visits from neighbors who stopped by to bring good wishes. Mothers knew how long the cake stayed soft, and it often lasted several days, though it rarely survived that long in a house full of children. Even after years passed, people remembered the dense crumb, the warm slices, and the feeling of being handed a piece fresh from the pan. Buttermilk pound cake tasted like Christmas hospitality baked into every bite.
Which forgotten Christmas desserts would you bring back to your family table? Drop your sweetest memory in the comments, hit like, and subscribe so we can keep preserving these precious traditions together.